The Colt Woodsman defined what a .22 pistol should be for half a century. Introduced in 1915, the Woodsman wasn't the first .22 semi-automatic pistol, but it was the first to get everything right. Sleek profile, excellent balance, a long barrel that delivered accuracy competition shooters had only dreamed of from handguns. Colt called it a sport model, marketing it to target shooters and outdoorsmen who wanted a lightweight companion for small game. What they created was a legend. The design was elegant in its simplicity, a straight blowback action, a grip angle that pointed naturally, sights that actually lined up. Everything about the Woodsman screamed refinement, and shooters noticed immediately. Within a decade, it dominated competitive shooting circuits. Olympic teams trained with it. Recreational shooters swore by it. Hollywood prop masters reached for it whenever a script called for a discreet sidearm. Then World War II changed everything. The military needed a training pistol, something cheap to feed, easy to maintain, and accurate enough to teach proper fundamentals before handing recruits a .45. The Woodsman fit perfectly. Thousands were procured for training programs. An entire generation of servicemen learned to shoot on Colt Woodsman pistols, burning through bulk .22 ammunition instead of expensive military cartridges. The economics were irresistible. A soldier could fire 100 rounds of .22 for the cost of 10 rounds of .45 ACP. After the war, those same veterans came home wanting the pistol they'd trained with. Boy Scout programs adopted it. Police departments used it for marksmanship training. Country clubs kept them at trap ranges for members who wanted to practice between rounds. The Woodsman became ubiquitous, a fixture of American sporting culture. Colt produced the Woodsman for 62 years without major redesign. That's not stubbornness, that's perfection. Every .22 pistol that followed would be measured against the Woodsman's ergonomics, its balance, its reliability. But while Colt perfected elegance, one German company was about to make the .22 disposable. The Walther PPK and .22 LR brought European refinement to a market Colt had owned for decades. Walther's approach was fundamentally different. Where the Woodsman was a purpose-built target pistol, the PPK was a defensive sidearm scaled down to .22 caliber, compact, concealable, built on the same blowback system that made the centerfire version famous. German engineering met American plinking, and the result was a pistol that fit in a jacket pocket but still delivered respectable accuracy. The PPK's success proved something important. There was room for more than one kind of .22 pistol. American manufacturers noticed. High Standard emerged as Colt's domestic rival, securing military contracts and dominating Olympic competition through the 1950s. Their Supermatic series featured adjustable triggers, replaceable barrels, and precision sights that made the Woodsman look almost crude by comparison. Olympic shooters switched allegiances. High Standard pistols claimed gold medals in Melbourne, Rome, and Tokyo. Then the floodgates opened. Post-World War II import regulations loosened, and European manufacturers rushed into the American market. Beretta arrived with their Model 70 series. SIG brought Swiss precision machining. Czechoslovakian CZ pistols offered Eastern Bloc affordability with surprising quality. Suddenly, American shooters had options that ranged from $100 imports to $1,000 competition pieces. The .22 pistol market fractured into distinct categories: heavy target guns with wraparound grips and counterweights for formal competition, compact recreational pistols for backyard plinking, hunting sidearms with longer barrels for small game, training replicas of military sidearms. Each design philosophy attracted its own following. Quality varied dramatically. Premium European imports like the Hammerly and Walther GSP set new standards for accuracy. Mid-tier offerings from established manufacturers delivered reliable performance at reasonable prices. But at the bottom end of the market, importers brought in anything that would chamber a .22 cartridge and fire it most of the time. The term Saturday Night Special hadn't been coined yet, but the conditions were forming. Cheap zinc alloy frames, pot metal construction, pistols selling for less than a box of premium ammunition, manufacturers whose names appeared and disappeared within a single year. The quality makers worried about their industry's reputation. They had good reason to worry, but as reputable makers refined the platform, Budget manufacturers were about to flood the market with junk. The Raven MP25 cost $25 and was worth about half that. Manufactured by a rotating cast of Southern California companies, Raven Arms, Jennings Firearms, Lorson Engineering, Phoenix Arms, these pistols shared a common philosophy: make them cheap, make them fast, and let someone else deal with the consequences. Zinc alloy frames, pot metal slides, springs that fatigued after a few hundred cycles, barrels that were barely rifled. These weren't firearms as much as they were firearm-shaped objects. The failures were spectacular and predictable. Frames cracked at the hinge pin after 500 rounds, slides separated from frames mid-firing, sending the bolt carrier backward into the shooter's face, firing pins broke, stranding live rounds in chambers with no safe way to extract them. Feed ramps weren't polished or even properly angled, turning every magazine into a gamble. Some pistols arrived from the factory unable to complete a full magazine without jamming. Accuracy was a joke. At 7 yards, close enough to read a license plate, these pistols printed groups measured in feet, not inches. The sights were cast into the slide as decorative bumps. Triggers pulled anywhere from 12 to 20 pounds with creep that felt like dragging furniture across carpet, but they were cheap and that mattered. Pawn shops sold them by the dozen. Convenience stores in rough neighborhoods kept them behind the counter next to cigarettes, no background checks required in most states, no waiting periods. Walk in with $30, walk out armed. The social consequences were immediate and devastating. These pistols became the weapons of impulse crimes, suicides, and accidents. Children found them in dresser drawers. Domestic disputes turned lethal with weapons that hadn't existed in the home an hour earlier. The term Saturday Night Special emerged from this era, though its exact origin remains disputed. What's undisputed is the association it created. 22 pistols were no longer sporting tools or Olympic instruments. They were crime guns, cheap, disposable, dangerous to everyone, including the person holding them, Congress noticed. The Gun Control Act of 1968 attempted to stem the tide with import restrictions based on size and quality standards. Domestic manufacturers simply shifted production strategies. If you couldn't import junk, you'd manufacture it in California or Florida, where regulations were lighter. The quality crisis continued through the 1970s and into the 1980s, tainting the reputation of every 22 pistol by association. Legitimate manufacturers watched in horror as their market drowned in zinc-framed garbage. High standards struggled. Colt's Woodsman sales declined. The 22 pistol needed Jushu. While lawmakers battled over pot metal pistols, one American company was quietly engineering the most reliable .22 ever made. Bill Ruger's Mark I debuted in 1949 as the anti-Saturday Night Special 2 decades before Saturday Night Specials existed. Investment cast steel construction. Simple blowback action with fewer than 30 parts. A design philosophy that prioritized function over flash, durability over cost-cutting. Ruger had watched the market fill with cheap stamped pistols and European imports. He wanted something different. A .22 pistol an American farmer could afford but couldn't destroy. He succeeded beyond measure. The Mark I was famously difficult to disassemble and reassemble. Owners joked that you needed a gunsmith, an engineering degree, and divine intervention to get the thing back together after cleaning. Internet forums would later fill with videos titled Ruger Mark II Reassembly Tutorial that ran 20 minutes long. The takedown procedure became legendary for its complexity, requiring pins, patience, and occasionally profanity. But once assembled, the Mark I simply wouldn't quit. Shooters reported round counts exceeding 100,000 with nothing more than spring replacements. Competition shooters burned through case after case of ammunition without failures. Boy Scout camps issued them knowing they'd survive decades of abuse by teenagers. The pistol became boring in the best possible way. It just worked every single time without drama or maintenance beyond basic cleaning. Ruger refined the design carefully over decades. The Mark II arrived in 1982 with improved sights and a bolt hold open feature. The Mark III followed in 2004 with a magazine disconnect and loaded chamber indicator to satisfy liability lawyers. Each iteration kept the core design unchanged. Steel frames, reliable feeding, that maddening reassembly process. The Mark series became the most produced .22 pistol in American history. Olympic teams trained with them. Survival instructors issued them. Backyard plinkers bought them by the thousands. They appeared in gun safes next to expensive custom pistols, valued equally despite costing a tenth as much. The cultural impact was profound. Ruger had proven that quality and affordability weren't mutually exclusive. While Saturday night specials cracked and jammed, Ruger's just kept cycling. While European imports required specialized parts and trained armorers, Ruger's ran on hardware store springs. The pistol wasn't sexy or innovative, it was the AK-47 of .22 pistols. Everywhere, indestructible, and utterly reliable in a way that made competitors look fragile. But while Ruger built tanks, one iconic brand was about to make the .22 fashionable again. Kimber conversion units in the 1990s turned $1,000 1911 pistols into 10-cent trainers. The economics were irresistible. A drop-in .22 conversion kit cost $200 and transformed any 1911 into a cheap training platform. Same grip angle, same trigger pull, same manual of arms. Shooters could burn through 500 rounds for the price of 50 rounds of .45 ACP. Police departments noticed first, then competition shooters, then anyone who wanted to practice without draining their ammunition budget. Advantage Arms followed with Glock conversions. Marvel Precision Engineering offered units for 1911s and Browning high powers. Siener developed kits for AR-15 rifles. The concept spread across platforms. Keep your expensive duty gun, swap the expensive caliber for something you could actually afford to shoot weekly. The conversion boom revealed something important about modern training philosophy. Shooters cared more about repetition than recoil. Muscle memory mattered more than ballistic performance. A .22 conversion let you draw, aim, and press the trigger 1,000 times for what 50 centerfire rounds would cost. The math was simple, the results were measurable. Then, the AR-15 pistol market exploded in .22 caliber. CMMG released dedicated .22 upper receivers. Spike's Tactical followed. Smith & Wesson launched the M&P 1522, a complete rifle built around the .22 cartridge from the ground up, rather than adapted from a centerfire platform. Suddenly, shooters could train on black rifles without the recoil, noise, or cost of 5.50 or 60 mm ammunition. Ranges that banned centerfire rifles welcomed .22 AR pistols. Apartment dwellers could shoot indoors with reasonable noise levels. But the conversions came with trade-offs nobody advertised. Reliability suffered. Conversion kits required specific ammunition brands and bullet weights to cycle properly. Standard velocity rounds caused jams. Hollow points refused to feed. The lightweight bolts and springs designed for heavy centerfire cartridges struggled with the .22's minimal energy. Cleaning became critical. Carbon buildup from rimfire primers clogged actions designed for cleaner centerfire powder. Accuracy took a hit too. Barrels optimized for high-velocity centerfire rounds didn't stabilize subsonic .22 bullets effectively. Groups that measured 2 inches with .45 ACP spread to 6 inches with .22 conversions. Shooters accepted this as the cost of cheap training, but the compromises were real. The .22 had gone tactical, complete with rails, optics, and suppressors threaded onto barrels never designed for them. The .22 had gone tactical, but someone was about to make it terrifying, at least on paper. Advantage Arms marketed a 4-barrel Derringer in .22 LR as if more barrels solved problems nobody had. The concept was absurd from the start. 4 separate barrels stacked in a block configuration, 4 separate firing pins, a rotating striker that indexed to each barrel sequentially. The trigger pull measured somewhere between terrible and unusable, requiring 15 pounds of pressure to break. Accuracy was a fantasy. The barrel block wobbled enough that point shooting was the only realistic technique. The pistol existed purely as a conversation piece, a mechanical curiosity that fired cartridges but served no practical purpose. The industry had learned nothing from the Saturday night special era. Gimmicks still sold. Taurus released their .22 poly pistol with a polymer frame that promptly began cracking at stress points. The frame-to-slide junction separated under recoil on multiple reported examples. Taurus issued a recall, but the damage to their reputation lingered. Polymer technology worked brilliantly for centerfire pistols. Glock had proven that conclusively, but the .22 cartridge's unique recoil impulse, a sharp snap rather than a heavy push, created stress patterns engineers hadn't anticipated. Frames designed for 9mm forces failed under .22 cycling. Kel-Tec promised revolution with the PMR-30, a 30-round .22 Magnum pistol that looked like science fiction. 30 rounds sounded impressive until shooters discovered the pistol would only reliably cycle with specific high-velocity ammunition brands. Standard .22 Magnum loads caused light primer strikes. The lightweight slide needed maximum energy to cycle properly. Owners maintained spreadsheets tracking which ammunition worked and which turned their pistol into a single-shot novelty. Heiser Defense introduced the double tap, a two-shot .22 Magnum Derringer marketed as a pocket defensive pistol. The recoil was punishing despite the diminutive cartridge. Mechanical reliability issues plagued early production. The concept, a modern Derringer for concealed carry, ignored a century of evidence that Derringers worked better as historical artifacts than defensive tools. Chiappa brought the Rhino revolver design to .22 caliber, firing from the bottom cylinder chamber rather than the top. The engineering was sound, reducing muzzle flip by aligning the barrel with the shooter's hand, but it was a solution seeking a problem. The .22 cartridge already had minimal recoil. Reducing it further provided no practical advantage while adding mechanical complexity and potential failure points. The pattern repeated across decades. Manufacturers chased novelty over function. Marketing departments promised innovation. Shooters discovered that proven designs from Ruger, Browning, and Smith & Wesson simply worked better than gimmicks wrapped in tactical aesthetics or engineering experimentation. While experimenters chased novelty, the classics were getting facelifts. Smith & Wesson launched the Victory in 2016 with a singular mission: kill the Ruger Mark series. The Victory arrived optics-ready from the factory, featuring a Picatinny rail machined into the frame and a modular grip system that fit different hand sizes. The takedown mechanism required a single button press, eliminating the engineering puzzle that had frustrated Ruger owners for 60 years. Smith & Wesson had studied every complaint about the Mark III and designed solutions for each one. The Victory was Ruger refined, polished, and modernized. Ruger responded 6 months later with the Mark IV, finally addressing the reassembly nightmare that had defined their pistols since 1949. One button, the frame hinged open, cleaning became simple, reassembly became possible without instructional videos. Ruger had listened, and the Mark IV fixed the one genuine flaw in their legendary design while keeping everything else unchanged. The competition forced excellence across the industry. Browning's Buck Mark, introduced in 1985, suddenly looked prescient with its aluminum frame and modular approach. The pistol had been quietly excellent for decades, overshadowed by Ruger's dominance but never truly inferior. Now it found renewed interest among shooters who wanted something different from the Ruger-Smith & Wesson duopoly. Training replicas emerged as a distinct category. Walther's PPQ and .22 LR replicated their duty pistol's controls exactly. Sig Sauer's Mosquito mimicked the P226's handling despite persistent ammunition sensitivity issues. Glock never produced an official .22 version, but conversion manufacturers filled the gap. The philosophy shifted. Two pistols weren't separate tools anymore, they were training analogs of centerfire duty guns. The red dot revolution transformed even budget platforms. Pistols that once shipped with fixed iron sights now included optics mounting plates. Shooters who'd never considered a red dot on a .22 pistol discovered that electronic sights made recreational shooting more enjoyable and competitive, shooting more precise. The technology trickled down from competition to casual use faster than anyone predicted. Reliability questions persisted with polymer-framed .22 pistols. The lightweight construction that worked brilliantly for centerfire cartridges still struggled with rimfire's inconsistent pressures and sharp recoil impulse. Steel and aluminum frames remained the gold standard for absolute reliability, even as polymer gained market share through price and aesthetics. The .22 pistol had evolved from Boy Scout tool to tactical trainer, from Olympic instrument to suppressor host. The .22 pistol had evolved from Boy Scout tool to tactical trainer, but one application would rewrite its reputation entirely. Suppressor technology and simplified National Firearms Act trust procedures converged in the 2010s to resurrect the .22 pistol's sporting reputation. The physics were perfect. Subsonic .22 LR ammunition traveling at 1,050 feet per second, paired with a quality suppressor, produced sound levels around 110 decibels, roughly equivalent to a hammer striking wood. Not Hollywood silent, but quiet enough for backyard shooting without hearing protection or neighbor complaints. The combination that film sound engineers had faked for decades was suddenly real and legally accessible. Specialized designs emerged to capitalize on the suppressor boom. Ruger released the Silent SR with a threaded barrel as standard equipment. GSG introduced the Firefly, designed from conception as a suppressor host. Manufacturers started threading barrels on pistols that had never been suppressed before. The aesthetic changed. Extended barrels with thread protectors became normal rather than tactical affectation. The market exploded. Suppressor sales surpassed firearm sales by 2020, driven largely by rimfire applications. Shooters who'd never considered sound suppression discovered they could shoot in their backyards without disturbing wildlife or neighbors. Competitive shooters stopped wearing electronic hearing protection. Firearms instructors taught new shooters on suppressed .22 pistols to eliminate flinching caused by noise rather than recoil. The cultural shift was profound. For 50 years, .22 pistols had carried the stigma of Saturday night specials and cheap crime guns. Suppressors rehabilitated the category's image completely. These weren't instruments of violence anymore. They were gentlemen's sporting tools, precision recreation equipment, gateway firearms for introducing children to shooting sports safely. The legal complexity remained. Suppressors still required federal registration, a $200 tax stamp, and months of ATF processing time. But the demand proved shooters were willing to navigate bureaucracy for the experience. The quiet .22 pistol became aspirational, a marker of serious recreational shooting rather than budget desperation. The Renaissance came full circle. The Colt Woodsman had been marketed to sportsmen and outdoorsmen in 1915 as a refined recreational tool. A century later, suppressed .22 pistols reclaimed that exact identity, stripped of the intervening decades of crime association and quality crises. The platform had survived zinc disasters, gimmick phases, and reputation damage to return to its original purpose. A century after the Woodsman, the .22 pistol remains what it always was: cheap to shoot, impossible to master, and universally beloved.